Ready? Please welcome Scott.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to first thank Ann and the Chamber for the invitation to come out and speak to you about our sign ordinance. Not the most exciting topic in the world. Glad to see that we have a decent-sized crowd here today. I was worried that we were going to have, one table or two tables to hear about the exciting sign ordinance. But it is important, and it affects businesses in Sun Prairie. I think you'll see the changes that we're proposing. In some cases, we're kind of loosening things up and providing a little more flexibility. In some cases, we are trying to tighten some holes and clear up some language and so forth. So we appreciate you coming out to learn more about it. Also wanted to say that this is really still an ordinance that's in process. We're still preparing it. As of yesterday, we were still talking with the DOT about some changes to the ordinance and kind of getting some clarification. We're going to be working on this for a couple of weeks yet, so if you have questions today, certainly bring them up today. We can talk about them. You'll see that the ordinance is going to be available on our website. We're going to have all the presentation materials available on our website as well. So after the meeting, if you want to check it out and learn some details, and if you have questions, certainly contact us. If you have comments, suggestions, concerns about what you hear today, or any other signage issues in the city that you've dealt with in the past, or things you'd like to do that the ordinance doesn't allow, certainly bring those to our attention, because we're going to be tweaking the ordinance yet for the next couple of weeks before this goes to the Plan Commission later at their meeting in October. So with that, I also wanted to mention today that it's not just me giving the presentation today. Tim Semen, who's a planner in my office, in my department, is also here, and he's going to be covering probably the most important piece of this. He was more involved in the actual development of the ordinance and tweaking the language, and we'll be explaining some of the changes, the main changes that are being proposed to you. So let me start first by just telling you what I'm going to tell you, basically what we're going to go over, a little background information from me. This sign ordinance project is part of a larger project that city staff is involved in. We're rewriting and reorganizing the entire zoning ordinance. This is just one chapter of the zoning ordinance. So I'm going to give you a quick update on that, talk a little bit about the existing sign ordinance and some of the problems and issues that we've had with that ordinance over the years. Brief introduction to the new ordinance and just kind of some of the things we're trying to achieve with this new ordinance. Then Tim's going to talk about what we're calling here decision points. These are changes that we're proposing that we think would be a good idea to wrap into the ordinance, but that the Plan Commission and City Council are going to have to review and agree to and make decisions on. And then I'll pick up again and we'll talk a little bit about where we go from here. So first, however, since every time I come to these meetings, we get a lot of questions about what's going on around the city. I'm going to give you some updates and hopefully hit off some of those types of questions ahead of time. People interested in new projects that are going on and when is Costco going to go up. Their website indicates November 15th is their opening date, and I'm pretty sure that's a pretty solid date. They're actually opening about a dozen stores in the month of November across the country. They have an opening in Minnesota or Illinois the day before ours, then they open the Wisconsin store, then they have one in either Illinois or Minnesota again. So they're on a pretty tight schedule, so I'm pretty certain that that's going to be the date that Costco opens. Our downtown redevelopment project we have going on right now, New Perspectives with the Lighthouse of Sun Prairie, that's expected to open up sometime in January or February. So I think February 1st is the target date they're looking at, but they've been blessed with good construction weather this last year, so I'm not sure if they're going to be ahead of schedule or not. A lot of questions about Walmart. We went through a big zoning process with them over the winter and this spring, and you probably have read a lot about that in the paper. They have decided to hold off their construction start until the spring. They were initially hoping to get started this past spring, but had some issues come up, and then it got to the point where opening up or starting their construction project this year would have affected their Christmas shopping season this year. So they decided to hold off, and they'll be getting started in the spring. As far as Marcus, I've actually heard a lot of people have come up to me in the last couple of weeks and said, I see Marcus is getting started. Marcus is not getting started. There's some dirt being moved out there, but it's not the Marcus Theater project. We still don't know exactly when they're going to get started. We were hoping that they were going to break ground this fall. They have some incentives to do so, to get something in the ground by the end of the year, but they have not indicated to us that they're ready to do that, so we're expecting perhaps sometime next year. They have an approved project. They're telling us they're still very interested, but I think a lot of it is tied to the sale of their property in Madison, the existing Eastgate property. The activity you do see going on in Prairie Lakes, they're starting to do some underground work for both Pizza Ranch restaurant and then a multi-tenant building that they have approved for the area that's right across the street from Costco. And that's most of the work that you see going on, putting in sewer and water lines and started. And then just a quick update on the housing situation. I try to do that every year. So far this year, we've issued about 40 to 45 single-family permits. Still not a huge number, but that's the total we've been issuing for the entire year in the last 3 or 4 years. So we're a little ahead of schedule from the last few years. It's a good thing. And then 2 large high-end apartment buildings have also been issued this year. The second building at Iron Gate, which is just south of the Cop Store on the west side, and also another building in Smith's Crossing, Van Buren Place. So we've had about 101 units multifamily this year. All right, so now a little bit of a background. I mentioned that we're in the process of updating the zoning ordinance, and that's I think I've probably been here at least 2 years in a row telling you that the new zoning ordinance is coming. It's a very long, tough, tedious process, probably the most difficult project I've been involved in my career, and it's just taking a long time. We've had some staffing reductions in the planning department, and all of that is kind of factored into that project dragging on a little longer than we originally anticipated. We're hoping 6 months or so we'll have something ready to kind of roll out to the public, and we can start talking about that. The sign ordinance is one chapter, one of 14 chapters in that ordinance. It's really the only one that kind of stands on its own, that we feel like we can move it forward to adopt sooner than the rest of the ordinance. There's not as much interaction between this ordinance and the other chapters. So, although it wasn't originally our plan, we've had some signage issues come up in the community over the last few months where we thought, why not get this ordinance adopted a little more quickly and maybe provide some benefits to some area businesses. And 2 of those in particular, I think everyone's familiar with the Culver's issue, where they did a great project last fall, redid their building, put up this nice outdoor seating area with a beautiful wall around it, and it happens to cover up a part of their sign. So we've had a lot of complaints about people not knowing the flavor of the day and so forth. Unfortunately, our sign ordinance is not flexible enough to allow them to easily address that problem. So without spending tens of thousands of dollars to move their sign, completely redo their sign, they're kind of stuck. And we think there are some provisions in our new zoning ordinance that will help solve that problem. One of the reasons to try to get this ordinance out a little early. And a similar issue with the Main Street Shopping Center. They'd like to redo their signage there. The current ordinance isn't very friendly, even though that's such a large site. We think that the new ordinance can help them out a little bit. So that's why we're moving this forward a little ahead of time. And this is just kind of an informational meeting for you. We hope it gets you thinking about the sign ordinance. If you have any other ideas or thoughts, contact us. I'm not going to talk much about the zoning ordinance rewrite. I gave the same presentation to the City Council on Tuesday night, just so that they were kind of familiar with what I was going to be rolling out to you, in case you had any questions or comments for them. Just kind of gave them an update as to where we were with the zoning ordinance rewrite. All the chapters that you see up there, this is the table of contents for the new zoning ordinance by chapter. Everything you see in white there is essentially done. It's been redrafted, edited by staff extensively, and is ready to go. We're still working on the chapters in yellow, and I'll tell you the use standards there, 17.22. That is a very difficult and very complex chapter, and we're really getting bogged down there right now. But once we get done with that, things should roll out pretty quickly, and we should have this ordinance ready. So I say 6 months, but I'm not going to wait a little bit with that one. Just to explain a couple of the changes we're doing, and then I'll move away from this topic. The table of contents for the current ordinance is on the left on the screen, and the new table of contents is on the right. And one of the problems with our existing zoning ordinance is it's difficult to navigate through and find just the basic information you need. So, for instance, if you have a property in the urban commercial zoning district and you want to find out what the setbacks are, building heights, densities that are allowed, and so forth, you've got to go to 3 or 4 different chapters to do that. And it's a real pain, just from our standpoint, in finding that information, but it's even worse for someone from the business community or the development community that's trying to use our ordinance. So we're really trying to streamline things, combine things, make it more of a one-stop shopping, one-chapter shopping for all the basic information. And so it's an important project, I think, from that standpoint, that we'll have a better, easier to use ordinance when all is said and done. I will move on from that now, and let's talk about the existing sign ordinance. First of all, let me say that our current sign ordinance I don't think is a bad ordinance at all. I think we haven't had a lot of complaints about it over the years. There have been a few, and we've had some complaints in terms of using it, but as far as what it allows, I think it's reasonable for the most part. The difficulty that we have is some of the wording is a little difficult to interpret. And we'd like to clean that up. We have problems sometimes. We have a couple of members of our building inspection staff here today. And there are times when between the planners and the building inspection staff, we don't agree on the interpretation of the ordinance, which is a problem. If we can't agree, how do we expect you guys to understand the ordinance and be able to follow it? So we're trying to clean up, we're working closely with them, we're trying to clean up a lot of that language and organize things a little better. I mentioned we've got some rigid requirements, and there are some requirements that we think we could add a little flexibility. So we're going to be looking at that. There are some new trends in signage out there that our ordinance just doesn't address well, so we'd like to update the ordinance from that standpoint. We're not going to talk about these today, but we have some First Amendment issues, I think, where parts of our ordinance deal with the content of signs, not just the size and location and so forth. That's a problem. There's been a lot of case law in the country related to signage, and most of them deal with First Amendment issues. And then probably the thing that's most noticeable is a lot of our new developments out on the west side or wherever, we're going through the plan development process for those, which allows the Plan Commission and City Council to vary requirements to help be more flexible, to help make these projects work. And we're finding that a lot of the same variations are being requested from the sign ordinance, and they're being routinely granted. So the question is, why are we still trying to enforce these ordinance provisions when we're regularly varying them for new projects out in the edge? So we're going to try to clear some of that up as well. Everyone probably recognizes this. So the point here is there's a lot of difference of opinion on signage. It's obviously a very subjective issue, signage, sign ordinances, and there are certainly some very successful places in the country where there seem to be no controls on signage at all. Obviously, Times Square, one of our more identifiable and more successful urban places in the country. If there's a sign ordinance there, it can't be very large. That's not always the case. I think the norm when you've got a bad sign ordinance is results in things like this. And it's one thing to provide some flexibility and allow businesses to get their message out there and be identified by passing traffic and so forth. But I think at some point there's so much clutter, so much information overload that the sign kind of loses its purpose. And that's kind of illustrated in these pictures. So what we're looking for is something in between. If you look at the top photo, I've actually had a few business owners in town ask me about off-premises signage, so off-site signage. They'd like to put a sign down on the corner because nobody knows I'm down the street, and I'd like to get my name out there. And that's all well and good. Look at the top picture there. If you're the first sign there, and people can see that, it's great. I'll go down there to find these services or whatever. But at some point, all of that gets lost. I'm guessing most drivers go by this corner now and don't see anything on those signs because there's so much. One of those signs even points to a hospital that's down the road, and it kind of gets lost in the clutter. A pretty important piece of information that's covered up by the rest of what's going on. So what we're really looking for here with the sign ordinance is some balance between too much flexibility and too much regulation. And I think that's what every ordinance is trying to get at. And we're hoping that by loosening things up a little bit, we don't cross that line, but that's kind of what we're shooting for. So I'm going to talk just kind of in general terms about the sign ordinance, and then Tim's going to take over and talk about the specifics. So what we've done with the new ordinance, and you're all welcome, the ordinance is on our website, you're all welcome to go out there and take a look at it. We've done a lot of reorganization and kind of clarifying things. We've moved the permit information to the front of the chapter where we think it should be, right out there for everyone to see. We've done some things, and just as an example, the existing ordinance talks about what signs are permitted, then talks about what signs are prohibited, and then talks a little bit more about the types of signs that are permitted. It's kind of a mess. So we've moved let's tell people what they can do first, and let's tell them what they can't do after that. Those types of things as far as the organization of the ordinance. Increased flexibility, Tim's going to cover a couple of the things that he's going to be talking about. There's also a kind of a trend in the ordinance to have the planning department be the enforcement wing of all these sign provisions, and that's really not how we've been operating. Building inspection division issues all the permits, they do all the site inspections, they do all the zoning inspections and so forth, and it just doesn't make sense to have a different department in charge of signs versus everything else that happens on a site. So we're kind of cleaning up the ordinance from that standpoint and putting that responsibility with building inspection, which is where it's really been in practice all the while. And then lastly, just updating some of the standards to reflect some sign types and trends that are out there. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tim, who's got 6 or 7